When you fast, what happens is you're no longer digesting, you're no longer assimilating, you're no longer eliminating, which means that the body can now suddenly focus on healing. Hi everybody, we've been asked to share our experience with fasting. So we decided, Kretka and myself, that we would do videos separately and each explain our own experience. I'm starting off, but you can expect to hear Kretka's testimony of her fasting experiences also. I first heard about fasting probably back in the early 1990s, and it wasn't something that I'd ever tried before. I had never fasted. I think that I'd maybe skipped breakfast. That was about as far as I'd pushed things. Even when I was sick and lost appetite, I would force myself to eat. When I was a young lad, I was always told that you should feed a cold and starve a fever. And that had stuck in my mind, and I thought there was truth to it. I thought when you've got a cold, you should eat. When you've got a fever, you should not eat. But even though my elders were saying feed a cold and starve a fever, when I had a fever, I would be encouraged to eat. They would say, you've got to eat something to build up strength again. And I believed this. I believed that you do have to eat in order to keep up your strength. And even though I'd been fed the idea, the adage of feeding a cold and starving a fever, I never practiced that. Later on, I actually learned that what it really meant was that if you feed a cold, then you'll have to starve a fever, because if you keep feeding a cold, you're never going to get rid of the problem, because the problem comes from what you're feeding yourself. Anyway, I was a young man in my early 30s, and I set off on a rather strange pilgrimage. I told myself that I was going to bike around the world for peace. So I was on my bicycle and I was in France. This is a long story, and I go into all the details of just how this happened for me, how it started and what happened afterwards. I explain this all in my biography. The second volume of my biography covers my third decade. So anybody who's interested in finding out about just what the dickens I was doing on my bicycle in France at the time, you can read my biography and you will find out exactly what was going on in my life. But anyway, as I explained, I was biking through France and I happened to stop in a place in Brittany where I stayed shortly with a family that were originally from the UK, Karen, Ren and their daughter Megan. I've no idea what happened to them, but if by any chance you happen to be listening to this, Karen, shout out to you. I'd love to know what's happening in your life these days. It's been a while. Anyway, Karen used to fast every Friday. Now, she'd been doing this for quite some time when I got to France. She was a seasoned one-day-a-week faster. And this fascinated me some, that she would fast one day a week. So I decided that I wanted to do that too. So I started fasting one day a week, except I couldn't. Except that by the time it was mid-afternoon, I was feeling nauseous and started craving food. So I know the first few attempts, I just couldn't manage it. By mid to late afternoon, I was so sick that I just always caved and started eating something, because I just felt like I've got to eat, otherwise I'm going to throw up. And I didn't like the feeling at all. It was not until possibly some months later that I succeeded to do a one-day fast. And this was not because I was in any way ill. it was simply because I liked the idea of doing a one-day fast. It was something that appealed to me, and I just felt like it was a frontier that I wanted to break through. I wanted to go one whole day without food, and I didn't realize how difficult that would be. Now, I know that's not the case for everybody. Some people can do a one-day fast even if they've never done one before. I believe there are some people that could manage it quite easily. But for me, it was difficult. I'm not going to deny that. I did have a lot of problems breaking that one-day fast. Breaking that one day, that 24 hours of not eating. It was actually more like 36 hours because I would stop eating at night. Not eat all night, obviously, skip breakfast, skip lunch, skip dinner, not eat all night, and then eat breakfast. So it was like 36 hours I was fasting. And I probably threw up the first time I did it too. I probably did throw up, but I broke that barrier and I got through. And I'm not trying to say that this is a good thing to do, by the way. I don't want to be saying that you should be doing one day a week fast. But at the time, I believed in the notion that it was a good idea to give the body a break from eating one day a week. I really admired what my friend Karen had been doing, and she made it look so easy. She would always be working just the same as always, and she'd prepare food for her family the same as always, and get on with it as if she wasn't really bothered. You couldn't really notice that she was fasting. And yeah, I admired that. And there's a part of me still that actually thinks that it's not a bad idea to be doing that. I don't want to say it is or it isn't. I'm not trying to push it or not push it. I'm just trying to tell you how I feel about it. Anyway, I continued to do one day a week fast. Sometimes I would miss, but I would come back to it and I would continue doing this. And at a certain point decided I wanted to do a 3-day fast because I wanted the experience of it. I'm someone that wants to experience things. And by that point, by the time I decided to undertake a 3-day fast, I had read a fair bit about fasting. I had read Herbert Shelton, quite a few of his books. He wrote a lot of details about fasting, which I found very informative. And I also read Edmond Székely, I think his name was. He wrote The Essene Science of Fasting. Wonderful little book. Oh, and I also read quite a bit of a French fellow called Albert Mosseri, who I believe was a kind of disciple of Herbert Shelton. If he hadn't been directly taught by Herbert Shelton, he was highly influenced by him. And he used to produce a quarterly French newsletter, which I was not around at the time when he was producing it, but I had a lot of back copies, old copies that were in the place that I was staying. And so I was reading those old copies of the newsletter he'd produced, and I really felt like inspired by what he'd written. So I was kind of very influenced to experience fasting more and the state of fasting. And once more, when I decided to undertake the 3-day fast, it was not because I was in any way feeling ill or under the weather. It was simply that I wanted that experience. At this point, I was still living in France. I was no longer staying with Karen and her family. I was living in the Pyrenees in France. And I was feeling kind of lost, I suppose, because, well, frankly, I wasn't succeeding with my Bike Around the World for Peace plan. I'd gotten stuck in the Pyrenees. I'd biked down to the Pyrenees, and there I found myself living in a community, and long story short, I ended up living there for 3 years. I'll tell you more details about it another time, or if you're impatient, you can always get hold of my biography, because a lot of stuff happened to me during that decade of my life. And yeah, it was quite an exciting time, really, for me, that whole decade. Anyway, my first real experience of fasting, because I felt like I needed to actually heal something, also took place in that community. What happened was that it was winter and icy outside. And I had been walking barefoot all year, and I really, really did not like wearing sandals or any kind of footwear. So I was pretty much always barefoot. But in the winter, it was so cold that if I went outside barefoot, I would soon feel the burning sensation on my feet and toes from the snow or ice that I was walking on. And I did try a few times walking, but I would always end up having to run back and really thaw my feet out because they were frozen. Even the toilet there was outside. So if I went to the toilet, I would run out there barefoot through the snow and the ice, which was maybe 30 meters or something from the house, and run back in again. But that was difficult for me to do as well, because we're about 900 meters altitude and the winters could get quite cold. Sometimes I would put my sandals on because I couldn't stand to feel that cold on my feet. So I put sandals and socks on. Sandals and socks was about the most I had as far as footwear goes. So I put these sandals on sometimes. And one morning, I recall that I put the sandals on quite reluctantly because I was helping somebody load up a car before they were leaving for the day. And on the steps leading up to the house, my foot slipped on the ice. And the sandal had no grip, I think. So it just made my foot twist and turn. And I sprained it in a very, very bad way. It was the worst ankle sprain I'd ever had. And my ankle and all that area around the ankle just swelled up like this grapefruit, which was very distressing for me because after that happened, it was very painful for me to walk, even just short distances. So suddenly getting out to the outhouse was a huge chore that I did not relish at all and avoided as much as possible, which again I go into detail in my book about. Basically afterwards I was pretty much kind of bedridden. I didn't do much. I wasn't pulling my weight. I couldn't really do much at all. I just had to heal because just moving around in the house was difficult. So I was in my room a lot and wasn't contributing and wasn't a happy person. I was very, very down because I didn't really have understanding from people. I told them I wanted to fast and they weren't happy with me doing that. Of course, my ankle was healing. And as soon as I could again, I was up on my feet again and moving around and doing things even though I was limping. And one day I was up in one of the upstairs rooms. I think there were maybe 3 or 4 floors in this really old farmhouse that we were living in. I was on the 4th floor renovating a chimney. There was an old chimney there where I had a hammer and was knocking out big bricks that were around the fireplace to redo it because it was sort of crumbling. And one of the bricks, when I hit it, it fell out and rolled onto my foot that was still not fully healed. So I was once more set back weeks with the healing because it hadn't fully healed. And having this brick land on my foot just once more meant that I couldn't do anything. I guess this is normal, that when the body is not working properly, it's much easier to be clumsy with things and for further accidents to occur. And that was certainly the case with me then. So once more I found myself in my bedroom feeling somewhat depressed and useless because I couldn't do anything. One night, as my foot was healing, my girlfriend at the time, who was a French girl living in the community also, she'd been living there before I got there, and she's still living there to this day. She was lying in the bed next to me. The telephone rang, and in her eagerness to get to the telephone, she jumped out of the bed and kind of jumped over my side of the bed and in doing so really hurt my foot again, which was not in a good place anyway. So the healing was once more set back again. Eventually my ankle did heal, but I noticed that whenever I walked, my foot was bent slightly inwards. It was my left foot. It was bent slightly inwards. And I just assumed that I would have a limp for the rest of my life. I came to terms with it. It wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't like I was fully disabled from it. But I did have a limp, and I thought that it would always be there, because even some months later, it was there. So I just assumed that it would never fully heal. But I'd been inspired from reading about all this fasting, and I thought, I'm going to do this. Doesn't matter that everybody is telling me that I shouldn't be doing it. I will go out in the wilderness by myself and just fast and see what happens. So I took my sleeping bag, a tent, the same tent that I'd been using when I'd been biking, and a lot of empty bottles with me. And I went out into the forest, actually on the community property, but out in the forest there. It was quite a big property they had there, and a lot of forest land. And I went out into the forest, and I remember I found this beautiful spot under these pine trees. It was summertime, and I pitched my tent there. It was a really beautiful, beautiful spot I'd found myself. Couldn't hear anybody around because I was too far away from their house to hear anybody. There was no roads nearby. So I was basically just by myself out there. And as I said, I took empty bottles with me because I knew there was a spring that was not far away. So the first thing I did when I got there, after I set myself up, is I took the empty bottles with me to the spring, filled them up, brought them back, and had the water there with me. I didn't have enough for the whole fast, so I made that trip maybe at least 3 or 4 times during the time that I fasted. I fasted for 10 days, and it was the first time that I'd fasted away from people, away from distraction, away from the world and any temptation, which I think was a really good move for me, because fasting with temptation all around me, I'd always found difficult. I know that I have my weaknesses. I know that things are easier when you don't have temptation. So I was happy to be away from that and just doing what I was doing all by myself. And of course, like other fasts I'd had, within the first 3 days, I'd thrown up quite a few times. But after maybe 3 days, it got easier, in the sense that there was no longer that feeling of nausea, no longer that feeling of I need to throw up. And after 3 days, that feeling was only intermittent. It would come every now and again, but it would go away. And maybe I did throw up during that time, but it wasn't something that made the experience difficult for me. So I was lying, I think this was on the 7th day of my fast. I was lying on the ground and watching the sun light shining through the canopy of trees above me, feeling very at peace and very at ease. And suddenly I felt this beautiful, warm, healing, tingling sensation that surrounded my left foot and ankle area. And I immediately stopped all other thoughts and just focused on that area. And it felt like pulsating, tingling sensation that was almost like a gentle massage all around my foot as it lay there. I was lying on my back with my arms at my sides and my legs slightly apart, and feeling this beautiful sensation around my foot. And I think the whole experience maybe lasted for about half an hour, where it just seemed to almost like move up and down and around. I could feel stuff going on in there. It was Very difficult to put into words what it was I was actually feeling, but it was not at all unpleasant. In fact, quite the opposite. It was a very pleasant sensation. And when it was over, which was almost as suddenly as it had started, it just stopped. And I thought to myself, well, that was a nice experience. And I looked down at my foot and I moved it. And I'd got full movement of my foot again. I was no longer lame, as it were. I wasn't walking with a limp afterwards. I got up and moved around and my foot was completely as it had been before. So it completely healed on the 7th day of a fast, which was quite wonderful. Now, I've had obviously many fasting experiences after that time. That was my first longer fast. It was just for 10 days. And I think that that's enough for me to talk about today. I will talk about other experiences I've had with fasting at a later date. I hope that it's been entertaining somewhat and maybe inspirational, because I really think that when you do fast, your body has an opportunity to fully get to the bottom of things that need healing. As I've explained in previous videos, when you fast, what happens is you're no longer digesting, you're no longer assimilating, you're no longer eliminating. There can be some small elimination that happens over the days. Every few days, maybe you'll get a little bowel movement of black putrid stuff coming out, which is quite normal. But generally speaking, those three things that the body is doing cease happening, which means that the body can now suddenly focus on healing, which is always taking a back burner because your body has more important things to do. I've said it before, when your body is digesting and assimilating and eliminating, it has to do those things. You cannot leave things in your stomach to just putrefy. Your body has to digest things, and afterwards it assimilates whatever nutrients are in there into the body, and you have to evacuate the bowels. These are things which cost energy, which the body has to do. So any healing that you have takes a back burner. Of course, there is some healing going on, but the really deep healing happens when you start to fast. A lot of people don't realize this, how things that you've had wrong with you even for decades can be healed when you do a fast, especially a longer fast. Now, I've said also before that I used to believe very much in natural hygienism, which was what Herbert Shelton's method was, that he always spoke of. And that was the methodology of fasting that I followed. But in later years, I've come to understand that fasting is much easier when there is an actual healing crisis. So a lot of the fasts that I undertook in my earlier years, even up until a few years ago, I undertook them because I felt like I wanted to. But when you undertake a fast, when you truly reach a healing crisis, it's so much easier and will be more profound, which doesn't mean, once more, that I think that it's wrong to fast if you don't reach a healing crisis. Because if you have that youth, that vitality in you, I think it can be a good thing to help the body cleanse of all the years of food abuse that it's been given, which is what I was doing during those earlier years. I knew that I'd, for 3 decades, at least 3 decades, had been eating foods which I never should have been eating, which weren't really foods. They were things that masqueraded themselves as foods, and I was eating them. So my experience with fasting was to cleanse myself of all that wrongdoing from the previous decades. And I think that when you're youthful, when you've got that vitality, it's a good thing to be doing. And even if you don't have the vitality, fasting can help you regain it. And I have to repeat here that I never give advice. I don't advise you to fast or to not fast. I'm telling you my opinion. You have to reach your own conclusions in life. I know from my own experience what is right for me. And just because I feel that what is right for me is right for you, because I do feel that. I do feel that it's right for you too. But just because I feel that doesn't mean that you have to feel it. Make up your own mind. Choose your own path. Go your own way. And my experience with fasting and healing of the foot, as I did, is not a one-off thing in this world. It's not a unique thing. Many, many people have experienced how fasting can help them heal from things that doctors have previously said there's no way they can heal from. Even cancers. And things that when doctors give up on things, they'll say, you've got maybe 6 months to live. And they'll give up on you. They'll tell you, come and get chemotherapy, but you've still got only a while to live, even if you come and get chemotherapy or radiology or treatment or whatever it is that they give you. The truth is, your body is the one that heals, and not the doctors. The doctors don't heal you. They may give you pills, they may give you some kind of treatment, but that's not what heals you. What heals you is your own body. Your own body has the power to heal itself, and it's struggling, trying to heal itself on a daily basis. It does it all the time. The only thing that gets in its way is our misconceived notions of what we should be doing with it on a day-to-day basis, what we should be eating, how we should be living. If we could return to nature and get back to how things should be with us, and once more start obeying nature's laws, then the body will heal much, much quicker. And even the things where you think there's absolutely no chance of healing, because, as I've said, doctors have given up on you, your body can still heal. If it were me in a situation where I'd gone really, really wrong and abused myself so badly by eating all kinds of foods that I shouldn't have been eating, and I'm aware of this, I would personally go out in the wilderness and fast, and do so for as long as it takes. That's what I would do. It's not my advice, it's what I would do. Of course, if you've reached that healing crisis, it will be a lot easier to do. I think one thing with me in fasting is that my weight is around 54, 53 kilograms, around that. It's steady. It doesn't go down. It doesn't go up. My weight is steadily at around 53, 54 kilograms. And when I fast, these days, if I fast without hitting a healing crisis, my weight will drop quite quickly. I can easily lose half a kilogram a day. So within a week, I'm already below 50, which I don't like to be below 50. I don't like to drop below that weight. But if I reach a healing crisis and I fast, the body doesn't lose weight as quickly, and the body will enable you to continue the process for longer because it needs to do the process. So if you were really, really sick, fasting would be easier than if you just go out and do it of your own accord, because you've got 2 weeks off work now and you think, I'll take those 2 weeks off fasting. It would be harder to do that than if you suddenly get pneumonia, which is basically just an extreme case of it being internally toxic. Anyway, I could go on talking about this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stop now. I will talk more about it at a later point in time. Thank you all for listening, and I wish you all a pleasant and beautiful day, and hopefully see you next week.